I'm Allie Zendrian, founder of AtoZ Communications, and this is the Brand Stories podcast. This is where we discuss everything related to marketing, branding, and communications in general. This week, we have Kirsten Plonner, who is a specialist in crisis communications. Now, while this might seem like something that you only need if your office is basically either literally or figuratively on fire, it might also be a specialized area of communications that you need if you're trying to grow or otherwise have a tricky situation. Hear it all from Kirsten.
It was great having met you and gotten to experience the kind of crisis communications work that you're doing. I'm really looking forward to delving into that today. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Allie. I always love to discuss anything crisis communications and issues management. I'm a nerd like that.
Which is great, because I think that our audience needs to nerd out. People need to understand the differences. So thank you. So first question that I ask everybody is, what's your favorite brand and why?
Okay. I have two favorite brands. So the first is Fidelity Investments, and it's not because I'm biased. It's not because I've worked there, but I have had the unique, I would say, viewpoint of seeing them both from the inside as well as the outside. And the reason why I love them as a brand is because not only do they live and breathe their brand and their value prop, but on the inside, everyone there comes to work, and like that is what they're there. They're there to help people retire with confidence. Like, it is like the real deal. I think that especially for financial services companies and especially investment and asset management companies, sometimes there's a bit of a kind of coldness. It's like, we're here to invest. But no, people are there to help people retire with confidence and not just get to retirement, but get through retirement. And just like even a quick anecdote, one time I was doing an interview with a Fidelity executive vice president with a very good journalist. She was with the Wall Street Journal, but she was kind of like more like an investigative reporter. So she really wanted to dive deep and really understand. And after hearing just that, brand value, want to help people retire, she was like, I don't buy it. This doesn't make sense. Like, I'm sorry, like it just doesn't track. And I was sitting there as the PR person, like in my own like little box. And I'm like, I'm going to say this. And I told her, I said, you know what, if you came inside and not only spoke to more of our executives, but also our own clients, they would look at you as if you just called their baby ugly. And she was like, okay, well, game, let's do it. And by the time we had her speak with everyone, the story she wrote was so positive, because she was like, no, yeah, these people, and everyone came just like with, no, this is what we're here to do. So I love Fidelity. I love their brand promise, their value prop, all the things. They live and breathe it. And then the second brand I also love for very much similar reasons, just a different company, a different industry, is Delta Airlines. They take care of you. I'm sorry. Like, you get on, you have a great experience. And I've been through so many situations where it could have gone south. They could have been like, you know what, this was a mistake you made and your problem. But I've seen Delta associates, flight attendants, gate agents in act to make, and even just another quick anecdote. I was flying with my family. We were coming from Hawaii. We had a layover in Los Angeles, and I made a mistake. I booked 2 one-way tickets thinking I could game the system earlier. And I was like, oh my God, what this means though is that our bags are not going to transfer. And my daughter was like 2 at the time. And I was like, oh my God. And we had like an hour because of course I didn't want a long layover. We got our bags and had to rebook flights, and I was on the phone with a Delta representative and saying, here's my situation, running through the airport. And she was like, all right, get to this gate. As soon as you get there, get me the gate agent. And I put her on speaker. I got the gate agent, and they were just speaking Delta, blah, 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 go. She put out the ticket. She goes, here you go. And no extra cost. No, they just took care of it. And so again, just kind of seeing it from the inside, but also just understanding, what their own, mission is, and trying to give people a really good experience. And they live and breathe it. And I've seen it many times.
Love that. You have very good taste. And those are definitely strong reasons to love those firms. Getting back to what you were saying about Fidelity though. So for those people who don't experience PR people, I feel like that's that moment that you're like, your stomach just sinks when someone says, yeah, just to hell with your great experience. And, you love what you do. So how do you come up with that? Like, that's the equivalent of calling somebody's baby ugly. You're totally wrong, versus on the other hand, you could oh, I hope that my executive answers the right way. Oh, maybe I'm just going to end this interview. How would you take that decision and that thought process and that experience and explain it to other people and how we go through it?
I think it's a situation that was based on trust. I trusted the reporter. Like I said, she was more of an investigative journalist, but I respected her. I knew her journalism. I knew that she wasn't out to hatchet us. She was genuinely out to report on what she was seeing. And she was going to be candid with you if you were telling her something that she wasn't seeing. And so at that point, I also had trust with the executive. And trust me, as I was sitting there getting ready to say that, I was like, this could be a career defining moment in many ways. And perhaps it could go one way or another, but here we go. And I had that trust with the executive and with the reporter, knowing them, having done this for many years, but also knowing that, yeah, whoever we're going to put in front of this journalist, I know the story. I know this because I've seen it and they live and breathe it. So without that trust and also without having that insight, I wouldn't be as bullish. I'd be like, all right, well, let's get it back to you and we'll see, we'll get you some data. But instead it was like, no, this is who we are. I've seen it. I know these people. They're here every single day, for the people, the clients and, who they represent. So I think, coming at it with that, the trust factor, but also the knowledge, the experience, I think it has the ability to make it or break it.
Absolutely. Well, I give you a lot of credit in that situation, and obviously the result was amazing. So you did everything more than right, to say the least. So to explain to people who might not be familiar with crisis communications, how would you explain what that is and how it's different from just standard PR?
Crisis communications and issues management. It is a communications response for when you're dealing with a highly complex and highly sensitive situation. Now, could it be a situation that is life-threatening to your business? If this thing escalates and if it's not handled correctly, it will put you out of business? Yes. Or is it also applicable for a situation where it's like, our business is growing and we're about to do something very complex, which in some cases, especially with like a lot of RIAs, those are who are acquiring firms or taking on additional partners. And so even though that's something that's positive and something that's going to drive their business forward, it's still very sensitive and it still has the potential to send shockwaves, whether it's through their clients, investors, and their internal audiences too. Their employees and their other advisors may not be comfortable or it's just new. As people, we don't always like change. We don't always like new things. So the communications function in and of itself is multifaceted, but crisis communications and issues is when you are dealing with something that is sensitive, needs to be handled with care. There are multiple audiences that need to be communicated to at the same time with the objective of achieving a very specific goal. That yes, it is to support the business, but it's also in this situation to actually get through the event so that way the business can continue to achieve its own objectives.
I love that definition. That was very complete. So thank you. So based on your definition, you'd saying it's kind of like based on an event. So do you ever have clients that are just kind of long-term, that you have a crisis that lasts a year or lasts several years?
Oh, for sure. And I would say that you don't necessarily need an event. I would say that typically there is an event that kind of sparks the engagement. Sometimes it is something that is a bit scary and threatens the fundamentals of the business. But in other cases, it's like, okay, this is a big thing for us and we got to do this right. And we want to make sure we do it right. But ultimately, I would say crisis communications and issues management works best when it is an ongoing partner with the rest of the communications function with the rest of the business. I think that one of the hardest parts is when you come into a situation where maybe at first it wasn't as big a deal, or in some cases it's like, oh no, we got this, we don't need the crisis people. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, okay, we do need the crisis people because we just said this thing that did not go over too well. And then you come into it and you're like, what? Like, what's going on? Okay, let's level sit here. And at that point, it's the difficulty that you can't unring a bell. So you can always build back up and regain ground, but once something's said, you can't take it back. And I think during the regional banking crisis, the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank, when he said, don't panic, you can't take that back. At that point, you just let the horse out of the barn. And then we all know the end result of that. It became a full-on crisis, which I actually helped clients through at that time. So I think that, when you are a true partner to the communications function, part of the part of the objective with crisis communications and issues management is to acknowledge that there's risk. Everything, there's risk. I mean, even if you think like, oh, this is going to be the best story in the world, there's always some type of inherent risk that comes from it. And so having the function as a partner to say, okay, this sounds great, but let's just be aware that this audience here may not like it. Here's why. This audience over here could take it this way. That's why. We've actually been telling this audience over here something different. And what it becomes is that let us, make sure that we soften the beach. If you're going to tell this story, which, by all intents and purposes, perhaps it's a story that should be told, we can at least then go to our other audiences and say, hey, heads up, you're going to hear this story. Just want to let you know, here's the context for it. This is what it means for you. A lot of times is that when a story goes out or you have, even whether it's good PR or even just sometimes a viewpoint, it's a point of view and someone sees it and their feathers get ruffled. It's one of those inadvertent, outcomes that perhaps happens because either it wasn't known or it was, but the appropriate considerations weren't taken into account. So it acts as a true partner, not as like a linchpin or something to create obstacles. And then when there is a legit situation, a sensitive situation that comes up, you're all on the same page. We know that on the PR function, there's a great narrative going on. There's, reputational equity has been built, with a lot of good stories. And so then the crisis communications and issues management function can build off of that. They know, okay, we have a really good foundation here. We need that for this. And then being able to then address it appropriately, but also do it, like I said, in partnership with the rest of the business.
That's great. So for firms who might be thinking, I'm kind of on the fence, do I feel like I need them all the time, or do I just need them for when I either put my foot in my mouth, or like you were saying, if there's a growth event that's coming or whatnot? How do you determine which type of firm should have somebody like you on retainer all the time versus just tapping into you when they need you and then phasing out?
Well, first of all, when you need a crisis person, you need a crisis person, and you usually need them right then and there. And it's not that is not a function that you necessarily go to LinkedIn and say, okay, crisis communications expert, where are you? You reach out to your centers of influence, you reach out to other folks that are either in communications or other firms like you that have used them. And so I would say that by the very nature of crisis communications, we're built to act quick. You get in, you dive in. However, if you already have a relationship, even if it's just an introductory conversation, that leapfrogs the front end times 10. Well, first of all, they know who to call. Okay, call Kirsten. Let's get her on the phone. She already knows us. She knows how we're built. She knows our advisors, our executives, and we can just hit the ground running with her. And so, the ramp up time, because of the pre-established relationship, is just, you basically just, you don't even need a ramp up time. It becomes seamless. So I would say having some type of relationship, even if it's just knowing who to call and they know your name, you know their name, I would say that that's half the battle. The second part, in terms of, your question, in terms of when to have someone on retainer versus someone hourly, you just know. It becomes a situation where, and I've had, different clients, for either hourly or retainer. And in some situations, you're going to be dealing with it for a long time. And I think just even give an example, usually when there's some type of cybersecurity event, it doesn't go away overnight. Especially, working in a very highly regulated industry with all the various clients and, all the various, ins and outs, partners and, centers of influence. And also just, a lot of the compliance, matters that you have to take into account. It takes time. And so usually in those situations, having that ongoing partnership is helpful because then you just keep going. Then there are others where it's okay, we, are going to be doing this kind of deal. It's going to take place over the next 2 months. We work together to define what's needed. And in some cases, you don't need a retainer. Let's just do hourly. We'll kind of knock it out, get it done. And then you move on. So I would say above all else, just have the relationship so you know who to call, because you don't want to be figuring that out when you need them, because at that point, the clock's just ticking.
Yeah, absolutely. So to expand on that a little bit, and feel free to correct me, but I feel like among the reasons that you need a specific crisis communications person versus just a PR person who may have some knowledge of crisis communications is that in that situation, you really need somebody who can just dive right in and can go very deep in something like that. Versus in addition to that, we also need to get whatever news out to try to cover it up or do other PR functions. Would you say that that's sort of the difference, or how would you explain the difference between just PR versus crisis comms?
So I would say that when thinking about day-to-day PR, the way I would define day-to-day PR is reputation management, and that's done through proactive storytelling, like they call it the proactive news bureau. So that's making sure that your brand, your narrative is out there, that you're, living and breathing, your brand promise, so to speak, and that's done, when you pitch different reporters, stories about your business, like, here's what we're seeing, here's the insights, and it's not necessarily about your business. It's usually, or I would argue should be, about what you see as an industry expert, and of course the seat you're sitting in, you get that reputational, value, in return. Mm-hmm. Crisis communications and issues management, it becomes more of, it's still reputation management, but it's also reputational protection, because in this case you are protecting the brand. You are trying to think through every different impossible scenario. How do we account for all the various things that can happen? How is this going to affect various audiences? The things I want to really hit on is that a lot of times the audiences can just be your internal audiences, your employees, sure, like your advisors. How are they going to see this? Because sometimes what happens is that you have an event, and if you're focused externally, like PR is in a lot of cases, what happens is that then internally the fractures start happening. Everyone's like, well, we didn't know about this. Why weren't we told about this? Like, what are we supposed to say? Like, we were very good about communicating with clients, but what about us? And then what happens is that the calls start coming from inside the house. So it's understanding that a lot of time, and most of the times it is reactive because it's something that's happening to you. There are times where it is proactive, where you see something and you're like, this holds a lot of reputational risk for us. And do we want to either be reactive to it in the event it gets out, or do we want to be proactive and just rip the Band-Aid off and just call a spade a spade? Like, this is what happened, this is what we're doing to course correct, this is how we're making it better, so to speak. So whereas it can be both proactive and reactive, it really is about, how do I secure this business, how do I protect this business, and then how do we make sure that moving forward, this is able to be business as usual because of the communications and the strategy that was put in place.
Got it. So if you don't mind, how did you get into crisis communications, especially to your point of, crisis communication swoops in, people just wonder, like, where do these people even come from?
If you had told me back in like my college days, or even when I first started, because I first started off in news, which I think that predisposed me to being a crisis person, because it's just all deadlines. It's just everything that's going on. What's happening? Oh God, we're going to air. Like, I need to get that script done while I'm also like trying to get this graphic in. It was just like you're kind of running around with your hair on fire. Including, like, I was actually at CNBC when we had the massive electrical outage throughout New York City. And so all of a sudden you're like running your show, you're live on air, and then cameras are turning off. And like, so all of a sudden you're like in real time with millions of people watching. So I think I was predisposed to it, but still, if you told me, oh, Kirsten, you're going to be specializing in crisis communications, I would be like, no. You don't know me. That's so funny. You're so funny. I never would have seen myself. But it happened by accident. I think it happened because I was working in firms, and I would be working with partners of firms. After I left news, they were like, I have a situation, come work with me. So I just ended up working with people who worked on crisis. And then when I went to one of the global agencies, I was hired to service corporate communications and financial services. But what I didn't realize was that my boss was the head of the crisis function. It was in his group. And so whenever anything happened, they were like, come, we need your help. And I'd be like, okay, like, this is not what I do, but fine. And then as time went on, and just the more, I think I had a thick skin for it. I could think well under pressure. It became a situation where it's like nothing was too daunting. You kind of like, we're here to figure it out. We're here to help. We're here to help break it down and to solve the problem. So I kind of always had that mindset going into it. And then when I went to FICOM partners, then it became out of necessity. You have a client, they have a crisis right now, and guess what? The only person that did crisis. So, and then what happened was that clients would then come inbound and say, "Hey, we need you for this, we need you for that." And I think also just the benefit of experience. I've been doing this for over 20 years. Then becomes, it's just part and parcel to who you are. So.
Yeah.
A very long-winded way of saying that it was an accident. I didn't intend to go into it, but it turned into something that I legit have a passion for. I don't want to say enjoy, because it's in times of true crisis for businesses, it's not fun. It's not enjoyable. It's very scary for them, and I'm very sensitive to that. But my passion is to help them through it. Usually the first thing I do after I listen to the client and listen to everything, I'm like, I understand. I got you.
Oh.
We're in this together. The good news is that you're not alone. And sometimes that's exactly what they need to hear. You're not alone. We got this. We're going to figure it out. And I enjoy that. I enjoy helping. I enjoy the problem solving. And then those become clients for life. They trust you. You've been through it. They will come to you with just about anything. They know that you're going to give it to them straight, but you're also going to give them good counsel. And then you can also help them execute on it as well.
Yeah, love that. So I know that we've both talked before, but I was just thinking as you were talking of the complexity of crisis comms, that this seems like one of those areas that might actually be sort of growing as a job field, and might not be that thing that AI can easily, oh yeah, we just plug in XYZ and it spits out the response. I don't know to what extent you would agree, or how you would encourage somebody who is thinking about their communications degree or coursework about considering this kind of work.
Yeah, I think if you're looking into, first of all, you have to like the hustle. You have to be willing to withstand it, because there are some that are like, that's what they're built for. You're like, yeah, let's do this. Let's get into it. We're to help people. And there's a genuine passion for it. Others, not so much. They like to be more, it's more strategic, or they have relationships with reporters and they love the relationship aspect. But I would say to everyone, try it, because based on my experience, you might be surprised. You might be surprised at, just what you glean from it. But AI absolutely cannot do this job. If anyone were to say oh, I'm going to go to AI, even to ask for a crisis response plan, I'm like, no. Because first of all, even the crisis response plans that experts in humans write, they're not always complete, because every situation is different. It doesn't matter how many data leaks there are. Every single situation has some type of nuance, whether it's because of your business, whether it's how it happened, whether it's the type of people that it affected. There's always something that's different. So even when you have, you work with the experts to write something, you have to know that it's probably, if you're lucky, 60, maybe 70% there. And then, the rest of it, is going to be informed by the situation itself. So AI, no. And the other part about AI too is that I think the number one killer for a really good strategic crisis communications campaign is misinformation. And if you're going to AI and it's giving you the wrong information, well, guess what? You just made your situation that much worse. And on top of it, it's really hard to come back from that, especially if you're trying to regain trust or rebuild confidence with audiences. You go out, you tell them one thing, and you're like, "Whoops, sorry," and you can't tell them AI wrote it, because why are you using AI? Or if you do, then it's like, well, why are you using AI? So I would say that it's definitely a human-driven and human-led effort, business. Try it, because you might be surprised. And I would say that those who do it and do it well, I think that it's a rarity. If I could be a little bullish myself, I think that, for someone to really be able to dive deep, be the calm in the storm, think through everything, but also challenge the client to say, you said this, but this is what I'm seeing. Let's talk about this. Why? And really get some facts or some perspective that perhaps isn't matching up, and figuring out where that gap is. And those questions are hard. It's hard to ask an executive or a founder, why is this not matching? But you have to. because you have to be able to get to the heart of it. And if you don't, well, then misinformation finds its way in different ways.
So last question, and I apologize as this may be to a certain extent personal, but as you get through each crisis, because I can imagine that it takes an emotional toll on you too. We're in the midst of this situation. I didn't put myself there, but it stinks to deal with. I mean, after it's over, do you like have a glass of champagne, or how do you like emotionally handle this job for people who might not understand and are looking from the outside in?
So candidly, I'm not emotional about it. Like, it is not personal.
Good.
And I do go into it being like laser focused and being like, all right, let's get to the heart of this. And sometimes it is having the tough conversations. Candidly, like, it's not a clean cut, like start end. It's not as if you're like, okay, and we're done here. Let's move on. A lot of times there's a very long tail that the situation itself just kind of peters out. And sometimes when you recognize, okay, it's over, is when you're at the company barbecue and no one's asking about it. Your clients aren't saying, hey, how did that thing go? Oh my gosh, like that was tough. Or employees are like, is there anything else? Like, you finally kind of come to the situation where no one's talking about it anymore. And you're like, okay, I think we've rounded the corner. So there is no glass of champagne. There is no kind of like it's one and done. A lot of times then what does happen, so going back to your question about the differentiation between crisis communications and PR, what then happens is that it should roll then into what that ongoing proactive PR looks like. Okay, we're able to take a breath. We've rounded a corner. We need to be out there. We need to be telling stories. We need good insight. All the reporters that were banging down our door, if that was the situation, we need to go back to them with more, because it's all about relationships. Or even if it's, in that case, sometimes it's with clients, like saying, let's make sure, let's keep, building on the relationship with them. Other times it's even just with centers of influence, same thing. We rounded the corner. So that's when it becomes more of an ongoing partnership. And back to, okay, so proactive PR, you're doing their thing. Crisis and issues management never really turns off. It's like, all right, let's keep looking. And I would say that for any firm that's in growth mode and any firm that's going to continue to either increase their assets, acquisitions, it won't stop. I think one of the questions I get asked by clients a lot is, oh, I just want to make sure this never happens again. And I just tell them, it will. This will happen again. It may not be the exact same situation, may not be the exact same scenario, but as you continue to grow and become more complex, your issues are going to grow and become more complex. So make peace with it, because it will happen again, but you're prepared and and then the next time it's, still rattling, but it may not be as scary. And it's a situation where you've been through the fire once, you'll do it again. And then if anything, if you can take kind of some glass half full aspect to it, it's like, oh, okay, well, this means we're growing. And this means that we're continuing to evolve. And this is a being part of a growing business.
No. And I appreciate the fact that you were ending on a positive note there. So thank you very much for that. So everybody, I hope that if you do feel that you need Kirsten's services, or even if you're just thinking about it, to her point earlier, better to know who to go to when those situations arise than to just scramble when your hair's already on fire. So thank you for all your insights. I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Allie. I appreciate your time, and thank you for all the great questions. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. From another journalist, that means a lot that you think that I ask good questions.
Excellent questions.
Thank you.